All right, where were we? So she shows Julie, Lenore shows Julie the pictures of, that there is something inside of George. There is something inside of him. And that's why she stays with him. That there's more there than the surface that he presents on the weekends. Is that worth staying for? No, I'm not. Believe me, I'm not advocating this as a relationship you should be striving for in your lives by any stretch of the imagination. Okay, so I think the students come, Bella asks, to spend the weekend at his house because they want to feel cool, an adult who's cool and thinks deeply like they do, even though it's probably not that deep. And one of my favorite parts in the story, because I feel a little badly for George, but I don't feel that badly for him. I think he creates his own problems and makes his own bad choices. But when Sarah says, "If only my father could be like you," that is not what he wants to hear. He wants to think of himself as a 27-year-old brilliant man with another 25, 26-year-old women fawning all over him. And she says, "If only my father could be like you." Your father, I won't have that analogy, he says it pleasantly, but barely disguises his dismay for the comparison. So they feel he cares about them, but what do they really know of him? Not much. So it's George, just to kind of wrap back into him. Ask yourselves, how do you feel about these people? How do you feel about George and Lenore? Do you feel sorry for them? Do you feel nothing for them? And just come on, people, get over yourselves. Don't sit around pondering yourselves, your life existence, having these phony existential, what does it mean to be me? Oh, I'm this, I'm that, moments, And they don't seem like terribly good parents either. I mean, what did they have these arguments in front of their kids, these drunken things. It's not pretty. It's not pretty. Is it the worst thing in the world? No, we saw that in the last story, but it's still not good. Now, one thing here that no one brought up in the discussion board, because only 3 of you did it. Thank you to Tamia, Emily, and Bella for participating in the discussion board. She overhears George saying to one of their guests, "Lenore stayed with him because she was simple." Ooh. I don't know about you, but I'd have to go looking at those pictures of him in agony if that's what's keeping me with him right after I heard that. Oh, she stays with me because she's simple, which is a very simple thing to say. What did we learn in Good Country People? That no one is simple, right? And you can't be too bright if you say anyone is simple. But that sounds good to these young women that he's flirting with, and makes them feel like they're not simple and that he's getting anyway. Sometimes I'm okay with George. This time around, I'm just not. And I think the older I get, the less patience I have with him. He's very vain, right? He likes nice clothes, nice shoes. He's all about image. He's not an authentic person. All right, so the climactic scene of the story. He comes back, he and Sarah come back, and he's been drinking, and he says, "I'm in love." Julie and Lenore watch them in silence. "See no evil," George says, gesturing with an empty brandy bottle to Julie. "Hear no evil," he says, pointing to Lenore. He hugs Sarah closer. "I speak no evil, I speak the truth. I'm in love." Sarah squirms away from him, runs from the room and upstairs in the dark. So he's way overplayed this scenario. I really think that he and Sarah, it's more maybe emotional adultery. It's a term I've heard. But when he says, "Oh, I'm in love," she doesn't want to hear that from somebody she thinks of maybe as a cool father, and she certainly doesn't want him saying that in front of his wife and her friend. So she runs upstairs. They pack up and they leave. I mean, bottom line, what would you say to these people? I would say, grow up, right? You're 55. Don't act like you're 25. 25's a good age. You don't want to be any age forever. Grow wise, George. You're not an idiot. Well, that damn bitch, George says. I should have known she was a stupid little girl. Nice guy. The facade of smooth George is down. You went too far, Lenore says. I'm the only one you can go too far with. So she's telling herself and him that I'm closer to you than any of the rest of these young women who come to you. Remember, she's only 34. Damn it, he says and pokes the fire. A few sparks shoot up. Damn it, he repeats under his breath. His sweater is still wet. His shoes are muddy and ruined. Sitting on the floor by the fire, his hair matted down on his head. He looks ugly, older, unfamiliar, and I will add the word real, right? He looks like a real person. He's not all with his nice clothes, his expensive clothes on, not necessarily fancy, but expensive sweaters and shoes. He's not quoting literature, talking about how great artists are that he really doesn't know much about. He's real here. She thinks of another time when it was warm. They were walking on the beach together shortly after they met, gathering shells. Little waves were rolling in. The sun went behind the clouds, and there was a momentary illusion that the clouds were still and the sun was racing ahead of them. Catch me, he said, breaking away from her. They'd been talking quietly, gathering shells. She was so surprised at him for breaking away that she ran with all her energy and did catch him, putting her hand out, taking hold of the band of the swimming trunks. And he veered into the water. If she hadn't stopped him, would he really have run far out into the water until she couldn't follow anymore? He turned on her just as abruptly as he had run away and grabbed her and hugged her hard, lifted her high. She'd clung to him, held him close. He tried, so this is a flashback, back. He had tried the same thing when he came back from the walk with Sarah, and it hadn't worked. I wouldn't care if the car went out to the road, he said bitterly. Don't say that, she says. So he's gone from I'm in love to I don't care if the car goes off the road. This is not deep thinking. These are superficial reactions. They sit in silence, listening to the rain. She slides over close to him, puts her hand on his shoulder and leans her head there as if he could protect her from the awful things he has wished into being. She accepts his bad behavior because she loves him. You can call it a bad relationship, a good relationship. She loves him. We're not always drawn, we talked about this before, we're not always drawn to the healthiest of relationships. I've met people when I was younger and single who I thought on paper, this is a perfect person for me. But if you don't love the person, there's no chemistry. And then there are people you might have chemistry with who are dangerous for you. I'm not saying these two are dangerous for each other. Maybe they're made for each other. But she loves him and she stays with him. She's bonded to him, right? George refuses to see the complexity of Lenore. He doesn't want to get too close to anybody. He likes that distance that he has with his students. They look up to him. He seems cool. For 2 days, they go home. Maybe her simplicity scares him. Her unpretentious love, maybe that scares him, that she does love him. And that's why he has to call her simple. We don't really know. I think he's actually covering his heart with his words rather than revealing it. All right, so this is how I want to end our time with this story. He's actually covering his heart with his words instead of revealing it. This is a danger. You are students of literature. I am an ongoing student of literature. And sometimes when you get too good at reading and writing, you start to use words not in a way to understand yourself, but to create a false self. You can cover your heart and cover yourself by sculpting an image. Hey, we read fiction here, right? We all know about fake characters. We almost make up a persona for the world. That's not good, right? You have to know, yeah, you got to play a role with this person or that or whatever, but you want to be you, right? Some of the finest, most unpretentious, the most sincere, earnest people I know are the people with the least amount of formal education. There is something to be said for, there is something to saying education can turn people into phonies, right? Education can show someone to be a phony. Don't let it. Literature should show you how to understand your true self, to reveal your true self, to be your true self. Don't let it be a model for covering it over. For George, that's what he does. He covers his heart with his words rather than reveal it. Don't let that happen to you. But I almost forgot Emily's questions. This is good. The only question I really have after reading this story is, why the hell does Lenore stay with George? He treats her so badly. Also, what does Lenore mean when she tells George that he can only ever go too far with her? Okay, I think that was 2 questions, Emily. Does she mean that only he can treat her so badly and she will still stay? 3. If so, why? Why put yourself through that agony? Though maybe she stays with him because of their baby and she wants what's best for the baby, but is staying in a toxic relationship really what's best for the baby? 6. Teaching her the wrong lessons, showing her our relationship shouldn't be. 7. That was 7 questions, Emily, but thank you for 7 questions. Which ones did we answer? Number 1, why does she stay with him? Well, she loves him. He treats her pretty badly, but at the end he does let her see the real George. At the very end of the story, she sees him in all the ugliness. He is himself with her at the end. It's not pretty, but she sees the real him, and she's the only person he lets see that. I don't think this is a healthy relationship. Does she mean that only he can treat her so badly and she will still stay? I think so. I agree, yes. Why put yourself through that? I don't think this is a relationship people should aspire to. You can have a healthy relationship that also has love. You can have a toxic relationship that has love. And as far as around the kids, yeah, I agree completely. You know, the most influential thing the thing that influences us the most in the romantic relationships we have as adults is the romantic relationship we grew up around, period. We're always recreating the relationship we grew up around, whether it's parents or step-parents or whatever, grandparents, aunt, uncle. Whatever relationship you grew up around has a tremendous influence on the relationships you form. If it was a very healthy, loving relationship, you're likely to have a loving, healthy relationship. If it wasn't, you're likely to, let's not be too dark here. If you grew up around a bad relationship, you have to understand that and make a point not to recreate it, okay? Knowledge leads to behavior change. If you say, I don't want that, what my parents had, so I'm going to avoid that. Or in most cases, maybe the people you grew up around had great parts of their relationship and parts that weren't so good. Well, embrace the good parts and avoid recreating the bad parts with your significant other. But that's an important lesson to learn. It can save yourself a lot of heartache and personal problems, if you realize you're going to be prone to recreating the relationship you grew up around, for better or for worse, you need to make it for the better. You need to avoid what needs to be avoided from the past and embrace what you can embrace. So we'll leave you with that to think about.